at her neck, her wrist, her ears, all of it Renee's mother's collection. He kissed her cheek in front of the entire room. This is what a woman looks like. The room went still. Every eye turned to Renee. She didn't move. She just checked the time. Because her attorney was already in the room. Stay with this story. Because what happens in the next hour of Renee's life is the kind of thing people talk about for years. The Hargrove Charity Gala was held every spring at the Meridian Hotel downtown, in a ballroom that smelled like gardenias and old money. Round tables draped in ivory linen, 8 to a table, each one set with crystal that caught the chandelier light and scattered it in small gold fragments across the walls. The stage at the far end was dressed in ribbon and soft spotlights. The room had a way of making even ordinary people feel consequential, and that was precisely why Deshaun Carter had been marking this event on his calendar every year since he first got an invitation. Renee arrived alone at 6:15. She wore a deep burgundy dress, fitted, still, the kind of dress that required a woman who knew herself to wear it well. Her heels were quiet. No announcement, no click that said, "Look at me." She found her assigned seat near the front, smoothed her skirt once with the back of her hand, and sat down. On the chair beside her, the seat she had left empty because she had come alone and intended to, she rested her small clutch. She did not reach for wine when the server came. She ordered water. She folded her hands on the table and looked at the stage the way a woman looks at something she has already thought all the way through. She spoke to the couple at her left when they introduced themselves. She smiled at Deacon Pryor from their church when he crossed behind her chair and touched her shoulder in greeting. She accepted a compliment about her dress from a woman named Gloria at the next table, who leaned over with warm eyes and said, "Baby, you look like you came here on purpose." Renee said thank you and meant it. She was present in the room the way still water is present, completely, without disturbing anything. Then the back doors opened and Deshaun walked in. He had on a charcoal suit she had never seen. New shoes, low profile, expensive. His jaw was freshly lined, his posture arranged into the particular geometry of a man who wanted to be observed from across a room. He moved the way he always moved in public. Wide shoulders, chin lifted, the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had decided the evening was already his. And beside him, her hand resting lightly in the crook of his arm, was Brianna. Brianna was tall and composed, and she wore the gold like it had been made specifically for her body. The layered necklace sat across her collarbone in the graduated, intricate style that does not come from a department store. Hand-engraved links, each one slightly different from the last, the kind of craftsmanship that takes a particular kind of jeweler and a particular kind of time. The cuff bracelet on her left wrist was wide and polished, catching every passing light. The drop earrings moved when she turned her head, throwing the chandelier back in broken pieces. The set was complete, every piece present, every piece recognizable to the two women at the table near the door who had attended the same church as Renee's mother for over 20 years, and who, right now, were holding their glasses very carefully and not speaking. Deshaun steered Brianna through the room without looking at Renee. He guided her past Renee's table as though the table were part of the furniture. He walked her straight to the head table, pulled out her chair, waited while she settled, and then leaned down and kissed her cheek. Slow, deliberate, angled for the room, and said at a volume that was not meant to be private, "This is what a woman looks like." The room went quiet in sections. The way a crowd goes quiet when something happens that everyone sees, but no one, is supposed to acknowledge. A tightening, a stillness, a collective suspension of breath. Every eye in the room moved to Renee. She did not stand. She did not reach for her glass. She did not look at Deshawn or at Brianna or at the gold sitting on that woman's throat, the gold that had once belonged to her mother, that she had carried out of a pawn shop on Clement Street on a Wednesday afternoon, with a check in her hand and a chest full of something she had mistaken for love. She looked down at her wrist, at her watch, a single, calm look at the time. Then she set her hand flat on the table and turned her attention toward the stage, the way a woman turns her attention toward something when she has already decided the other thing is no longer worth her eyes. 8 months after the funeral, Deshawn sat her down at the kitchen table. He had a spreadsheet printed. His voice was controlled in the way voices are when a person is managing their own panic. He owed $40,000 to a supply vendor, a man named Harold Webb, who had provided materials for 3 back-to-back events and was now calling in the debt. If the balance wasn't cleared within 60 days, Harold intended to file a public complaint with the Business Licensing Board. Deshawn pushed the paper across the table and looked at her with the look she had fallen in love with. The one that said, he believed in her even when he needed something from her. "I've moved everything I can move," he said. "I don't have it." Renee looked at the spreadsheet. She looked at her husband's face. She went upstairs. She came back with the cedar box. "Renee," he started. "Don't," she said quietly. "Let me do this." She sold the collection the following week. Every piece except the locket. The pawnbroker on Clement Street was a fair and careful man who recognized old craftsmanship when it sat in front of him, and who paid her accordingly. She drove home with a check and handed it to Deshawn without counting it out loud. He held her face in both hands. He said, "You saved us. You know that? You saved us." She closed her eyes. She let herself believe it completely. She needed to, right then. 6 weeks later, the debt was supposedly cleared. Almost immediately after, Deshawn began to grow distant in the way that men do once they no longer feel they owe you something. Smaller conversations, less eye contact, a new way of looking past her when she spoke, as if she had become slightly out of focus. One evening, she was crossing the living room when she heard his voice from the back hallway. Low, careful, close to the wall. She caught one sentence before the floorboard under her foot gave her away, and he turned. "She'll never look at the secondary account." She kept walking. She went to the kitchen. She filled a glass of water and stood at the sink and drank it slowly, and thought about what a secondary account meant, and why a man would say those words to someone else in his own house. She did not confront him. She set the glass in the sink. She turned off the kitchen light, and she began, very quietly, to think. She found the deposit slip on a Tuesday. It was crumpled in the breast pocket of a jacket she pulled from the hamper to take to the dry cleaner, folded twice, the tight fold of a man who stuffed a paper away without thinking, rather than the careful fold of a man who meant to file it. She unfolded it in the laundry room under the single bulb overhead, and the amount sat there in plain black ink, exact to the dollar. It matched the check from the pawn shop on Clement Street. Every digit, every decimal. She stood in the laundry room for a long time, not crying, not shaking, just standing with the paper in both hands, reading the number over and over, until it stopped meaning anything, and then started meaning everything again. She set the jacket aside carefully. She went to her home office and closed the door. She sat down at her desk and opened a notepad and wrote down the account number from the bottom of the deposit slip and the transaction date and the routing information. And then she sat with the pen in her hand and did not move for a while because she was deciding not whether to act, but how. She had learned, in a year of watching and noticing, that confrontation gives a guilty man a head start. Tell him what you know, and he builds a wall around it before you can see the whole room. She did not want to see one wall. She wanted the whole structure, every floor, every door, every exit he thought he had. She called her bank the next morning from her car, 2 blocks from the house. She had joint access to. The woman on the phone was patient and methodical, and Renee had her account numbers ready and her voice level. And by the end of the call, she had a name. Carter Bowen Events Consulting, LLC. A business account. Secondary. Not on any statement she had ever been shown. She wrote the LLC name on the same gas receipt she had the account number on. She folded it in half and put it in the inside pocket of her wallet, behind her hospital ID. Then she drove to work. Sandra Mitchell's name came through her attorney's office, a referral from a judge, passed down the way useful information moves among women who look out for each other. Sandra was small and deliberate and wore reading glasses on a chain, and she listened to Renee across the desk without interrupting, without the sympathetic head tilt, without any of the language that processes a woman's pain as a category rather than a fact. When Renee finished, Sandra looked at her over the glasses and said, "Give me 2 weeks." It took 11 days. The LLC had been filed the same month Renee sold the gold. Carter Bowen Events Consulting, Deshawn Carter and Curtis. The $40,000 debt to Harold Webb had been real, but Harold Webb had granted a 63-day payment extension in writing before Renee ever sat down at that kitchen table. The extension was confirmed. The deadline Deshawn had given her, the urgent, desperate 60-day window, was a window that had already been propped open. There had been no crisis. There had been no last resort. The gold had been taken from her not out of necessity, but out of convenience, and it had gone not to Harold Webb, but directly into the seed capital of a business that was registered, incorporated, and operational before her mother's collection was even out of the cedar box, and Curtis Bowen had co-signed the account. The same week that Renee drove alone to Clement Street and laid out her mother's jewelry on a glass counter and watched a man she did not know weigh her inheritance. Renee read the report once through. Then she went back to the beginning and read it again. The deliberateness of it, the planning, the extension they had already secured before they even sat her down at the kitchen table, needed to land completely before she could decide what came next. Curtis, the man who ate at her table, who used her good dishes without being asked, who knew her mother's name, who had stood beside her at the graveside when Deshawn stepped away and she had been alone at the edge of the grave in January cold. That man had looked her in the face every week while carrying the full knowledge of what they had done. Sandra leaned forward and slid a second envelope across the desk. It was sealed, letter-sized, slightly thick. "There is one more thing," she said. "You will want to decide when you use it and how." Renee looked at the envelope. She did not open it immediately. She picked it up and held the weight of it in her hands, and understood, from its particular thickness, what was likely inside. Her hands were very steady. She concentrated on keeping them that way. "When?" she asked. Sandra's expression did not change. "That," she said, "is entirely yours to decide." Renee placed the envelope inside her bag beside the investigation report. She thanked Sandra. She drove home. She sat in the driveway of the house and she thought about her mother, and about the gold, and about Curtis, and about the 4 words on the back of the locket she was wearing right now against her collarbone, still standing. She pressed 2 fingers against the locket through the fabric of her blouse. She felt its small, familiar shape. Then she went inside. She made dinner. She set a plate in front of Deshawn and she asked about his day with the same tone she always used. And he told her it was fine and asked nothing about hers. And she ate her meal and cleared the dishes and went to her home office and sat down in front of a blank notepad and began to write. She did not write her feelings. She wrote a plan. An entry she had noticed weeks earlier while scheduling a dentist appointment on the joint tablet they kept in the kitchen. Community Business Recognition Award, the Hargrove Charity Gala. He had not mentioned it to her. She had not mentioned that she had seen it. She filed it away the way she filed everything she intended to return to. She RSVP'd for herself 3 days before the deadline, her name only. She called the event coordinator directly and was courteous and efficient and gave her dietary preferences and her seating request. And when the coordinator asked whether she would be attending with Mr. Carter, Renee said, "I'll be coming alone," in a tone that closed the question. Sandra had already begun moving the legal architecture into place. The separation documents were prepared. The civil claim against Carter Bowen Events Consulting was filed and ready to be served. Not filed publicly yet, held back, ready to be deployed at the right moment, the way a card is held back in a hand that already knows it will win. Renee reviewed every page. She asked questions. She understood what she was signing. She had not been careless with her own life once, and she did not intend to start. Her personal assets were repositioned quietly. Her savings account, money from before the marriage, kept separate because her mother had told her, "Always keep something that is only yours, not as protection against your husband, but as respect for yourself," moved into a protected trust. Her car title, a small investment account in a credit union Deshawn had never had reason to examine. All of it moved legally, cleanly, with documentation that Sandra kept in her leather folder. She called Harold Webb herself from her car during lunch one Thursday. She introduced herself simply, asked about their account history, and said she would appreciate his honesty. Harold went quiet a moment, then said, "Mrs. Carter, I always thought your husband was good people. I'm sorry it turned out different." Past tense. Renee heard it land and asked whether he would be willing to appear at an event. Harold Webb said he would be there. She also sent Curtis a text. Easy, warm, the way she had always written to him. His nickname, a question about his new project, a small joke about something he had mentioned weeks earlier. He replied within 4 minutes, relaxed, unguarded, completely comfortable. She read his reply and thought about the man who had written it, and then she saved the message and set her phone face down on the desk. Deshawn, in those weeks, was becoming something she could only describe as expansive. He stayed out later with less explanation. He bought 2 new things for the apartment without consulting her. A lamp she did not choose, a piece of wall art she did not like. The way a man decorates a space he has already decided he is leaving. He said things to her occasionally that were not quite insults and not quite nothing. Once, passing her in the kitchen, he looked at her with something that might have been contempt dressed up as pity, and said almost to himself, "You've gotten so small." She was washing a glass at the sink. She finished washing the glass. She set it in the drying rack. She said nothing. The night before the gala, Renee stood at her closet for a long time. She ran her hand along the row of dresses until her fingers stopped on the burgundy one. Fitted, still, the kind of dress that requires a woman who knows herself. She took it down. She held it against herself in the mirror of the closet door. She thought about her mother, who had worn gold to her daughter's wedding and looked like something consecrated. She thought about the 4 words on the locket she would wear tomorrow: the last piece, the kept piece, the piece she had held back when she handed everything else over. She hung the dress on the door. She went to bed at 10. She slept without interruption straight through until 6 in the morning, which was the sleep of a woman who had made every decision she needed to make and was simply waiting for the morning to begin. By 7 o'clock, the Meridian Ballroom was nearly full, and by 7:30, Deshawn had settled into the comfortable arrogance of a man who believes the evening is already decided in his favor. He laughed loudly at the remarks of the man beside him. He refilled Brianna's glass without being asked, and leaned in to say something that made her smile with her hand covering her mouth in the practiced way of a woman performing delight. He was, in every visible way, a man who had won. Renee moved quietly. She had arrived first, 45 minutes before him, and in those 45 minutes, she had done 3 things that could not be undone. She had found Terrence, the event MC, near the back hallway and spoken to him for 3 minutes. He listened. He asked one question. "You sure about this?" She said she was. He nodded once. She had located Harold Webb at the table he had been assigned near the right wall of the room and made eye contact with him from across the space. He gave her a single nod. His hands were folded on the table. His phone was in his breast pocket with the documents queued and ready. And she had watched Sandra come in through the side door at 7:14 in a dark suit and low heels, carrying the leather folder the way a surgeon carries an instrument, functionally without ceremony, and take a seat near the back where she could see the whole room. Deshawn did not notice Harold Webb. He did not notice Sandra. He was focused on his own performance, and people who are performing rarely look at the audience carefully enough to see who is in it. The room had its own temperature shift, somewhere around 8 o'clock, the kind you feel in your body before your mind names it, like pressure changing before weather arrives. Renee had moved to 3 different tables in the preceding hour, speaking warmly to people she had chosen deliberately. 2 board members of Deshawn's largest client. A woman from the hospital board who had sent Renee flowers when her mother died. Deacon Pryor, who had been at their wedding. Each conversation was brief, easy, complete. She gave nothing away. She was simply present the way she was always present. Full attention, no performance. At 8:15, Deshawn looked across the room toward Renee's table and found her mid-conversation with the board members from his biggest account. Something moved across his face, quickly, there and gone, and he looked away. Brianna said something to him. He nodded. He reached for his water glass. His jaw was tight. Curtis arrived at 8:17 with the expression of a man who had told himself everything was fine and was working to maintain that. He found his seat, scanned the room, and then found Renee. She raised her glass toward him. Barely, just a small lift. He looked away first. Beside him, Yolanda was watching the gold on Brianna's neck with the particular expression of a woman who is not yet accusing, but has stopped being unsure. The MC took the stage at 8:19. The program was about to begin. Renee smoothed the front of her dress. She looked at the stage. She looked at the watch on her wrist. She touched the locket once, just once, with one finger, and then she placed her hand flat on the table and waited. The MC called Deshawn's name at 8:22. The room applauded, generous, the kind of applause a room gives when it does not yet know it is applauding the wrong version of a person. Deshawn stood with a modest smile he had practiced into looking natural, touched Brianna on the shoulder as he passed, and walked to the podium with the full posture of a man who had arrived exactly where he intended to be. He thanked the committee. He thanked his clients. He talked about the community and what it meant to build something that served people. He talked about vision, about persistence, about surrounding yourself with the right energy. He paused and looked toward the head table, toward Brianna, whose chin tilted up precisely on cue, the gold at her throat catching every available light. And he said, with a pause for weight, "I especially want to thank my personal support system, the people who remind you what you're building toward." Renee stood. She did not push back her chair loudly. She did not look around for permission. She stood, and she moved through the space between the tables, with the evenness of a woman who had rehearsed nothing because she did not need to rehearse what she already knew. She arrived at the side microphone station. Terrence, the MC, was already stepping back. She leaned forward. Her voice came out level and clean. "Excuse me, before this evening goes any further, I think some people in this room deserve the truth." The room turned. Every face. Deshawn's hands went to the edges of the podium. Brianna went very still. Renee looked at the room, not at either of them. "6 months ago," she said, "I sold my late mother's gold collection. Every piece she left me. I sold it because my husband told me our business owed $40,000 to a vendor, and that if I didn't help cover it, everything we had built together would be lost. I believed him. I loved him. I gave him the only physical thing my mother left me when she died, because I thought that was what you do when you love someone. You give them what you have." She let the room hold that for a moment. "Harold Webb is here tonight. He is the vendor my husband described as the reason I needed to sell." Harold Webb rose from his seat near the right wall. He stood with the patient solidity of a man who has spent decades standing on what he knows. "That's right," he said. He did not raise his voice. The room was quiet enough that he did not need to. "And I want everyone here to understand one thing clearly. 63 days before Renee Carter sold her first piece of that gold, I had confirmed in writing, that I had granted Deshawn Carter a payment extension. There was no emergency. There was no 60-day deadline. There was no crisis. The debt was always going to be settled. I have every document. I have the email chain. I have the date stamps." He reached into his breast pocket. "I have copies here if anyone needs them." The room did not make a sound. Deshawn had not moved. His hands were still on the podium. His face had gone through several different arrangements and settled on something that was not an expression so much as the absence of one. Sandra came forward from the back of the room. Her heels were quiet on the ballroom floor. She set the leather folder on the table in front of the award plaque, directly in front of it, covering the engraved name, and she opened it. "Mr. Carter," she said, without looking up from the page, "these are separation documents and a civil claim against Carter Bowen Events Consulting, LLC. You and Mr. Bowen will both be formally served tonight." The name Curtis Bowen landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Curtis straightened in his seat. The chair beside him held Yolanda, who turned to look at her husband with a slowness that said she had not needed the name to be said to start understanding. She looked at him, and he looked at the tablecloth, and the distance between those two directions was the end of something. Right there at table 9 of the Hargrove Charity Gala, in front of people who had watched them arrive together. Curtis opened his mouth. Nothing came. Renee reached into her clutch and removed the second envelope. The one Sandra had set across the desk 11 days ago. The one whose weight she had felt in her hands, and whose contents she had allowed herself to fully understand before she decided what they meant and when they would be used. She crossed to the head table. She set the envelope in front of Brianna. Not dropped. Set. Deliberately. "You can open it," she said quietly. "Or I can tell the room what's inside." Brianna's jaw tightened. She picked up the envelope and opened it. The photographs were printed clearly and dated. Brianna at a private dinner, wearing the complete gold set, necklace, bracelet, earrings, Deshawn's hand on her wrist, both of them leaning toward each other, smiling. The date stamp in the corner, 3 days after Renee drove herself to Clement Street. 3 days after she stood at a glass counter and laid out her mother's inheritance and believed she was saving her family. Brianna set the photographs face down on the table. She set them down slowly, with both hands, like a person setting down something they did not choose to pick up. Her face had gone careful. The arrogance that had been sitting in her posture all evening, the tilted chin, the proprietary ease, had gone somewhere it would not be returning from tonight. The room was absolutely still, crystal still, the kind of silence that only exists in large spaces when every person in it has stopped breathing at the same moment. Deshawn said, "Renee." She did not turn to look at him. She reached up to her collarbone and unclasped the small locket. She held it in her closed fist for one moment, the last moment she would need to. And then she leaned forward and set it on the table beside the award plaque, beside the leather folder. She pressed it down gently with one finger. She looked at it for the length of a breath. She had been carrying her mother's voice inside a piece of metal for a long time. She understood, standing there, that she did not need the metal anymore. The voice was hers. It had always been hers. It lived in her chest, not in a chain. She picked up her clutch. She smoothed the front of her dress once. She looked at the room, at the deacon, at the board members, at Harold Webb standing with his hands folded, at Yolanda sitting still beside a man who had run out of ways to look at her, at all the people who had come tonight expecting an ordinary evening and were leaving with something else entirely. She said nothing more. She turned and walked toward the exit. Even steps, unhurried. The kind of walk that belongs to a woman who came here knowing exactly how it would end. Nobody in that room said a single word until she was already through the door. The Hargrove Gala was on a Friday. By the following Wednesday, Deshawn had received a written notice from his largest client, a property development company whose 2 board members had been seated 3 tables away that evening. The letter was formal and final. Contract termination effective immediately. Final payment for completed work enclosed. No explanation offered and none owed. Deshawn read it at his office desk and set it down and picked it up and set it down again. And none of those motions changed what it said. Harold Webb filed a formal complaint with the Business Licensing Board regarding the financial misrepresentation. The complaint triggered an audit of Carter Bowen Events Consulting, LLC. The company's bank account was frozen pending review. Curtis hired his own attorney the following Monday, which told Deshawn everything he needed to know about how Curtis planned to manage what came next, which was alone and at distance, and by making himself a separate and distinct legal problem from the one that had Deshawn's name on it. Yolanda asked Curtis to leave the house the Sunday after the gala. She had his bag packed by the door and told him in a voice that was completely even that they would talk through an attorney. Curtis called Renee that Wednesday night. She watched her phone ring and let it go to voicemail. He left a message that began, "Renee, I know there's nothing I can say that she deleted it at 7 seconds. She already knew how that sentence ended. Brianna was photographed leaving Deshawn's building 3 weeks later with boxes. The gold collection was listed as an asset in the civil claim, subject to return. Deshawn called twice. The first time, late on a Sunday, Renee looked at her phone and let it ring, and then turned the screen face down and finished reading the chapter of her book. No voicemail. The second call came 4 days later, and this time she answered only to say, "Do not call this number again." She had the number changed the following morning. A woman from their church, someone who lived 3 blocks from the house Deshawn was now renting alone, mentioned gently, over coffee one afternoon, that she had seen him at a gas station, alone. Driving the same car from the business, the vinyl lettering on the door already beginning to peel at the lower right corner, the adhesive giving way the way things give way when the structure beneath them stops holding. Renee thanked her. She drank her coffee. She did not take the information out again and turn it over the way she might have once. She was not tracking what was falling. She was only watching what was rising. The office had her name on the door in clean, brushed gold letters. Renee Simmons Consulting. She had been building toward it for 2 years, quietly, on weekends and evenings, taking small hospital administration contracts through a freelance firm and reinvesting every payment and keeping the books in a spreadsheet she updated every Sunday night. She had not told Deshawn, not out of secrecy exactly, out of the knowledge that some things belong only to you until they are ready to be seen. She signed the lease 6 months after the gala. The office was small, 2 rooms, a reception area with a window that faced east, good morning light. She bought one plant for the reception area, and she watered it herself every Monday morning when she arrived, which was the kind of small routine that tells you a place is yours. On this particular April morning, the light came in low and gold across the surface of her desk, the way light does in early spring when it is still learning how warm it intends to be. On the corner of the desk, in a simple wood frame, a photograph of her mother. 4th of July, backyard, head thrown back in a laugh that started somewhere very deep and arrived completely, the gold earrings she was wearing catching the afternoon sun and throwing it back. The cedar box was at home, in Renee's own closet now, on the shelf. She had put the locket inside it, not because she needed to forget the 4 words, but because she no longer needed to carry them. They were hers already. They had been hers all along. Her assistant knocked on the half-open door. "Your 9 o'clock is here." Renee closed the folder she had been reviewing. She smoothed the front of her blazer with both hands, a small, self-possessed gesture, the gesture of a woman who is comfortable with the weight of herself. She stood. She walked to her office door. She opened it, and she smiled. Not the careful, measured smile she had worn through the last year of watching and waiting and thinking and planning, but the full one, the one that did not calculate anything, the one that belonged entirely to her and to no one else. Some women are not broken by betrayal. They are clarified by it. The fire burns away everything that was never really theirs to carry, and what is left standing afterward is the truest version of who they always were. Renee did not win because she fought. She won because she finally set down the weight of a man who had decided, long before she discovered it, that her sacrifice was a resource, and her love was a supply he could draw from without restoring. And the moment she placed that locket on a table in a hotel ballroom and walked away, that was not loss. That was the moment she chose herself completely and without apology and became fully, permanently free. if this story moved something, because these are the stories we tell